All right. Hello, everyone. As it is every week at 3 o'clock, we go live Eastern time, and we always bring really, really awesome guests. And today, no exception, right? We've got my fabulous co-host here and co-founder of Helpopedia, Phil Vitrano. Yes, holding our little logo and helping it. And we are the folks that focus on how do we help youth. And youth development is a big, big thing because it's not just helping the youth, it's helping the parents and caregivers and teachers and everybody else who help the youth. And one of those educators and helpers is Kimberly Gawne here, the founder of Star Students. And it's all about homeschooling and helping and tutoring. So with that, I'm going to let Kimberly tell you what she does. Hi, Kimberly.
Hi, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Well, we're
Um,
excited for all that you do and just even your logo alone, right? Progress without politics. Like,
that
oh, yes,
is
let's get that nonsense just out of the way.
yes, that was a I will say that was a genius piece of work that was done. Was the logo coming up with that for sure. I unfortunately can't take credit for that. I had someone who suggested that to me. Many thanks to him because it definitely envisions the brand and what we stand for sure. Like you said, getting the nonsense out of the way.
So, with that, so what we've got today is the theme here, and I should be showing first. This is Kimberly Gawne. Here's who our guest here of Star Students, and our theme today is all about helping children thrive in those personalized learning environments. Like everything we do these days is going to personalization, right? Netflix really took a big whack at that, and ever since then we've gotten spoiled. It's like, what are my movie recommendations? It better be slow burn, better be a thriller, better be like whatever, right? So,
Mhm.
talk to us a little bit about your background first before we get into the 7 ways you can help your child thrive.
For sure, yeah. So I actually am coming from a teaching background. I never intended on running a business. It just kind of happened. It was a happy accident, so to speak. I love the teaching aspect of things. I got into teaching because I love kids. I've known since I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a teacher. What else do you do when you're wanting to be a teacher other than going into being a government employee, right? Typically, that's how it works, whether it's public or private, whatever it happens to be. I graduated Teachers College in April of 2020. So, if you all remember the world at that point in time, I kind of looked at the teaching world and I went, this is not where I belong. This is not where I belong. I can't do this. So to make a long story short, that's what happened in terms of how Star Students happened. It was a decision that was a scary one at the time, and I still sometimes I still sometimes look back and go, "Wow, man, I can't believe I did that." But it's been a good one, not without its own challenges for sure, but as with everything. So I started out with tutoring. I started out with just me, and that was kind of how things worked for about a year or so. Not even a year, actually, about 7 months. Because then by the summer, I had had people that were coming to me for homeschooling services, and like full on homeschooling. They wanted to hire me as a private teacher. I will be the first person to tell you that I don't know everything, and so I can't teach everything. And so I quickly realized I was going to have to hire people and hire licensed teachers who were on board with the slogan, right? Progress without politics. You can't very well be advertising a homeschooling service and homeschooling services and tutoring services and not have everybody on board with your policies and your procedures, right? With the way that we do things. The whole idea of alternative education is that parents are looking for something outside the public school system and in some sense the private school system as well. So making sure that everybody was on the same page is really important to me. I will say that we have an amazing staff, amazing group of teachers that I have that work with Star Students. I always say, like there's no I in team and there's no I in Star Students either. I'm very fortunate to have an amazing group of staff for sure. That is kind of how things are and how things sit. We have homeschooling services and tutoring services for parents as well as for kids, just depending on what the needs are for the family and what the needs are for the students. Every homeschooling family is different, right?
Well, that's the whole point of the personalized. And then it's also where for the entrepreneurs that are in our audience and listening, in hello to all of the guests that have appeared so far. As entrepreneurs, it's all about the pivot, right? You have to learn, like you said, like, oh, what do you have to do when your customers are saying, yeah, we don't want that tutoring thing, but we want this homeschooling thing. All right, so
Mhm.
you dived into it. So that's the way it is. And you also said another thing that I think everybody can relate to. It's up and down, right? It's not smooth. It's this, it's that. And you adjust and you try to figure it out. And that's what you're doing. So
Yes.
why don't you, before we get into the 7 ways that you're going to help kids thrive in a personalized learning environment, maybe give us a little more context about what you're seeing, what parents are asking for, why they're needing homeschooling. Just give us a little bit of a set the stage, and tell us where you're located too, please.
Yeah, for sure. So location wise, business wise, we operate in the Canada. That's where we started, and we're a little bit into the U.S. as well. That is kind of where this year is going. Is breaking into the U.S., which is fantastic. I'm not complaining. So Canada and the U.S. are our main target markets, I will say, simply because the majority of our teachers and the curriculums that we use are from Canadian and US, right? Depending on, of course, what if we're talking about tutoring or homeschooling. We do have some students that are in the UK, so we do have that option as well. I'm okay with Canada, the USA, and the UK. I think that's a good enough good target market. That's definitely
That's a
a
little
broad enough
small.
audience.
A little
Yeah,
small. And I think you're, I don't know. I think you're,
I'm not big enough.
yeah, you're not thinking big enough.
Yeah.
No, no.
Yeah, so that's how we do that in terms of the target market and target audience. To answer that question for you, in terms of patterns that I'm seeing with parents and things that I'm really noticing with parents and how they are and why they're choosing to either tutor or homeschool, whatever that happens to be.
Mhm.
The biggest thing that I noticed, the biggest complaint I would say from everybody, like across the world, this is globally, is that the the schools, the school system, the public school system, and by some extent the private school system is broken. It is just not working anymore. And a lot of that is due to large class sizes. That's the biggest one at fault. A lot of parents are complaining exactly for this reason that their child's education is not personalized. Their child's education is not unique to them, right? Now, when you have a class of 30 to 40 students, as is common in public schools, there is absolutely no way that you can personalize what your child is learning. There's no way that you can follow anything that is an inquiry based curriculum. For those who may not know, an inquiry based curriculum is a curriculum that follows the child's interests or inquiries based on the child's interests. So, formulating questions based on your child's interests and allowing them to learn about those specific things. Now, as a teacher, we would take those questions, those inquiries, and we would then be able to relate them to the curriculum so that we're still hitting all of those standards that the typical curriculum requires, right? But we're doing it in a way that molds the curriculum to the child rather than the child to the curriculum. Because molding the child to the curriculum is what the public school system does and what by some extent the private school system does. That's not personalized. You're not personalizing it unless you're taking the curriculum and you're molding it to your child. And that's really one of the pillars of what Star Students stands for, is molding that curriculum to your child.
Well, it's one of the things that where I was particularly excited to have you on the show because all of us at Helpopedia, we really believe that the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, which is
Mhm.
typically reserved only for special needs kids, we think 2 things. One, it should be for every kid because every kid should have an individualized plan. And it
Mhm.
shouldn't stop after you graduate. It should go on. Well, what's your work plan? Like, how does that fit in, right? In your career,
Mhm.
education? How do you continue to learn? So, Phil, did you have anything you wanted to add about that? Because you deal with a lot of students, helping them make that transition from high school into whatever's next.
I'm very supportive of Kimberly. The personalized, customized, tailored education is absolutely what they need, especially aligned with their interest. And so, why personalize? Why customize on something that they're not interested in? You're wasting their time. You're
Mhm.
wasting, and nobody looks. I mean, I hardly hear ever this expression. You're wasting kids' time. I mean, nobody's saying that in the schools. They
Uh-huh.
know
Well,
that it's a waste of time, but they don't say you're wasting kids' time. And it's just like for
mhm.
adults. too. Adults are not going to waste their time on something that they're not interested in. And so, and what's ironic is that we're in a democratic society, and where like you have the freedom of doing what you want, but not when you're in high school. You are limited to only the course offerings at that school. And of course, they're kids, so they can't just go from school to school to school to see what's what's best for them. But this homeschooling solution is extraordinary because it's unlimited, where you could make anything happen. And so if Kimberly has all the necessary resources and aligns it with the students' learning capabilities and the teaching styles, it's a perfect match.
And that's why she's here to talk to us about it. So, Kimberly, tip 1.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I mean, my first tip that I always give parents is that it is really important to get to know your child's learning style, right? Now, I will kind of preface this by saying these 7 tips, so to speak, to help your child thrive in a personalized learning environment is for parents who are, parents who are caring about their kids, which I would argue is every parent, right? But parents who care about their child's education enough to make a difference, right? And to say they want to commit to something different. They want to commit to doing the extra work. Whether your child is in public school, whether your child is in private school, whether your child is homeschooled. I mean, if they're homeschooled, you have the most freedom with this. But all of these tips are going to be relevant to wherever your child is at in their educational journey. You will just get the most out of them and be able to do the most with them if you are homeschooling them. Because if you're in the public school or the private school, you do have some limitations, right? Or you have more limitations, I should say, than if you're homeschooling them. So that being said, that's my disclaimer for that. So tip number 1, determine your child's learning style.
Right?
Yes. Tip number 1 is determine your child's learning style. You want to make sure that you have figured out how your child learns and how they learn best. My favorite thing to say to kids when I do an assessment with them or when I first meet them and we do this executive functioning questionnaire and or an informal assessment is there's no wrong answers. And the way that their face just like lights up is unreal. Like every single time, it never fails. Like, what do you mean? There's no wrong answers? And I say, the only wrong answer that you're going to give me is a yes or a no, because I need details. I need you to expand on things because I need you to talk to me in order for me to learn about you and about your learning style, right? In order for me to best determine and for my teachers to then best determine how you learn best and for us to be able to work with you in a personalized way, you got to be honest. You got to answer me honestly with these questions, right? So determining your child's learning style, I would say, is the number 1 thing. But the great thing about that is that there's no wrong answer as to how your child learns. It's not to say that if a child learns visually, that child is smarter or more intelligent than someone who learns kinesthetically, right? A child who learns better based on auditory instructions is not smarter or not smarter, is not more intelligent than a child who learns kinesthetically either, right? The 4 types of learning, so there's 4 types of learning styles, and it's really important to figure out which learning style your child is best suited towards, because that gives you massive insight into how best to teach them, or gives other educators massive insight into how best to teach them and to cater lessons to them, right?
So do you want to cover the 4 then? You mentioned already 3. You said the visual, you said the auditory, and the kinesthetic, and the 4th style.
Yeah, so there's visual, there's kinesthetic, and there's auditory. So visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. So the reading and writing one is not as common, but that is a learning style in which kids learn best by reading something and then writing about it. So kids like this tend to be very, I won't say introverted, but they tend to be very reserved in the way that they process information. Again, nothing wrong with that. It is just a way in which information is processed. I tend to be someone who processes information in the reading and writing style best, which is why I tend to, if I'm doing something, if I'm doing research or I'm learning something, I need peace and quiet, right? To read something and then to be able to write about it. That's me. I'm also a secondary visual learner, right? So you can have more than one learning style. It's just determining which one or perhaps 2 are the best for you. as a student.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Tip number two, this is something that again you can use in any sort of learning environment. But tip number two would be making room for flexibility. You want to make room for things to be able to be flexible, and for things for you to be able to be flexible with your child's learning. If they are in public school or private school, where they have check boxes that they need to meet at certain points in time, that can be difficult. So this is why I say there is a certain barrier to being able to use that, right? To being able to get the full benefit of that. But making room for flexibility is, I would say, the second most important thing, because when you're homeschooling and when you're allowing your child to go on this adventure and you're allowing your child to learn about what they want to learn, when you allow them to have a little bit of flexibility in what they're learning, is when they really start to take off, because they get excited because they have a little bit of freedom in what they're learning, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh,
who doesn't
tell
like
me
a little
that.
bit of freedom?
So where I've heard the arguments for is that as a society, right, we're all this like soft parenting, gentle parenting, we're too
Mm,
indulgent, and we should be like,
yes.
no, this is the lesson we are learning today. That's it. Because the child has to learn that there are boundaries, there are things you don't always
Mhm.
get your way, honey, all this, right? So where is that like all coming into play, where you want to give flexibility to learn, but not so much that they become entitled? They think that they can steamroll you as children because they learn quickly,
Yes.
right? Who's the weakest link?
Yes. Oh, for sure. That's funny that you say that. Actually, we have quite a few students that sometimes we gotta like make sure that they stay in check, right? Like, wait, no, this is what we agreed to. And I'm glad that you asked, because in all honesty, that's the third point that I was going to say. While you have room for flexibility, you do want to create a predictable structure. Um, Being a mother myself, I will definitely be the first person to say that kids thrive on structure. That is something that I have learned through research, but also through trial and error. And you need to have a predictable structure without it being rigid. So that's where the flexibility comes in, right? But creating a predictable structure in your child's schooling is really important. You want to be able to have a bit of a routine with them. So, to give you an example of what this might look like in a homeschooling setting, I can speak from personal experience from having done this with a couple of our students. We will do like a lesson planning session, maybe take 15 or 20 minutes outside of lessons that we do with them. And we'll say, okay, so here's, June, for example. We just started June, right? Here's June, for example. We're going to plan our science. We're going to plan the topics. We're going to plan our math. We're going to plan the topics. We're going to plan our English and our literacy. We're going to plan the topics, right? And those are just general topics based on what the child wants to learn. We do allow them some say in, of course, what they learn, right? I may have suggestions if I'm the one who's teaching the child, or other teachers will have suggestions if they're the ones who are teaching the child. But then once those things are, once those topics are chosen, this is where the boundary comes in, like you were saying, Laura Lynn. This is where the boundary comes in of, okay, this is what we've decided for the month of June. We're going to hold ourselves to learning about this for the month of June, to learning about these particular topics. It's okay if at the end of the lesson you're like, that really wasn't my thing. Okay, but you learned something, right? And in addition to learning academia, you also said, okay, this is maybe not something I'm as interested in, and that's okay. But it's the predictability of, this is what we're going to learn about. This is what I am going to learn about, and and I'm going to then make a conclusion based on that information, whether I do or don't want to pursue this. Either way is fine. We just reassess and adjust, right? When you're homeschooling, that's very easy to do, to have that sort of flexibility. And when you have personalized learning, that's very easy to do. When you're in a school system, not so much, right? So that's you don't have the option to be as flexible, because you're kind of just given the curriculum and you just have to work with it, right? And that's not the fault of teachers per se. That's not the fault of students. That's just the way the system works. And like I said, the system is broken. So
Oh, absolutely.
that,
And
yeah,
then, but it's the
that's
whole
my
thing,
opinion.
right? With parenting too, where again, on this idea that you've got predictability and you've got
Mhm.
flexibility, but you have rigidity. So if the whole thing is, all right, we're going to have to learn 3 lessons, right, in whatever, this biology or about animals
Mhm.
or about whatever, Here's 5 to choose from. You get to pick 3. So yes, you're getting choice, but you don't get to not choose biology. That's not an option, right? And
Right.
so it's that kind of thing. And I think parents, it's just so easy to want to default and say like, all right, just throw your hands up in the air and say like, forget about it. All right, we'll just skip biology. But you can't.
Yeah, because there are certain things that you would need to know. Now, there may be certain parts of biology that you're more interested in. Okay, let's go do a deep dive. Let's go do that study, right? But you can't just skip it altogether.
Bingo, bingo. All right,
Yeah.
tip 4.
So tip number 4, this is one that I always like to talk about, and that kind of surprises people. And focus on the child's strengths. Don't overcorrect their weaknesses. School is huge for this. Public school, private school, like any sort of educational institution. Yes, it is important to make sure that you correct the things that are wrong, of course, but you want to focus on a child's strengths in terms of subject material and in terms of content, right? Rather than focusing on where they go wrong or where they got things wrong all the time, right? When you are able to have a balance, right, of certain things rather than just focusing on one thing that they're super bad at. Say a child is not very good at math. Okay, you're not the greatest at math. So maybe, we're spending 40% of our time on math. We're spending 20% of our time on, excuse me, on science. And we're spending another 20 on English, and then the other 20% would be like a creative, right? Something that you choose to do, whatever that happens to be, right? I'm just going based off of a loose homeschooling schedule of the main topics that you'd want to make sure you cover. When you overcorrect a child's weaknesses all the time, that really can tear down their confidence, right? So it's not to say that you shouldn't correct them. Of course you want to, but there's a certain way in which to do it. And you want to make sure that the more that you give them that positive reinforcement of, hey, this is something that you're good at. This is something that we want to study. This is something that we want to do. And you just take the attitude with the stuff that they're not good at of, okay, this is just, it is what it is. We're going to work at it until you get better. Rather than the attitude of, and I see this a lot with teachers of, oh my gosh, you're so behind. You're at like a grade 1 level and you should be at like a grade 5 level. Like, how do you think that makes that child feel? Right? Even if it's not explicitly said, children are very, very intuitive and they're very perceptive. They can feel it.
Oh yeah.
And so when you come at it from a perspective of, oh, well, you're at this level and you should be at this level, rather than, okay, you're here. Do you want to get here? Let's get you here together, right? It's the attitude with which you approach those corrections and with which you approach those weaknesses that I find really makes a difference.
Well, what I'll share is that years ago, like I always say, like, millions of years ago when the dinosaurs still ruled the earth and I was just coming out of grad school and entering into the workforce, I did what was then Forbes Strengths Finder that has since become Gallup Strengths Finder because they purchased it and they've expanded it. But at the Forbes Strengths Finder, they interviewed thousands of super successful people, the Warren Buffetts, this, that, everybody of the world, former presidents of the US, like just super athletes, all this stuff. And they came up with these 26 dimensions and said, these are strengths. And then you go through the process of being evaluated and you get to know your top 3 strengths. But the whole premise is what just rocked my world and changed me for life, for the better, because it was focus on the 3 things that you can knock out of the park and to hell with all the crap that you're not good at. Let it go. I was like, wow, it was liberating.
Because oftentimes you can get somebody else to do those things for you, right? It's about operating in your zone of genius.
Yeah. Learning this crap you're not going to be good at anyway. Like next.
Right.
Right.
That realistically doesn't have any relevant value to your life.
Yes. It was so I get the parallels. I get it. Anyway, didn't want to hijack where you're going there, but I had to share that because it changed my life.
No, it absolutely, that's totally relevant. Not at all. It's totally relevant. Thank you for bringing it up because it is important to realize that even as you get to be an adult, right, there are things that you get to offload or that you should offload to other people because you're not the greatest at them. Other people can get them done faster and frees you up to work on things that you are better at naturally. Yeah, 100%. And so that kind of actually leads us to this is like a very segue. This is a great segue into my next tip. Yeah, Nope, I didn't, not at all.
It's the Canadian
That's
wavelength, though. We're dialed into
exactly.
that because I grew up north
Yeah,
of the border, so yeah, that we're
exactly.
dialed.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. So did I. Yeah, so the fifth thing that I would say, to teach life skills as a part of learning. So what we really try to do, whether we are helping a student in a tutoring aspect, whether we are coaching a parent for homeschooling, or whether we are we're having people hand us, not literally, but hand us their children for our high level homeschooling program, and we're in charge of the entirety of their education. We really do make it a point to incorporate life skills into learning. That can be very simple. That can look like fractions in measurement. That can look like, because you use fractions,
Mhm.
students, you would use fractions when, or for boys, I'm sorry, you maybe use fractions when you're building something with mom, with dad out in the garage, right? Things like that. So there's many ways in which you can connect life skills that you learn into a more academic concept, right? And that's just with academic subjects. We also place a very heavy focus on executive functioning and on soft skills. There is absolutely no reason why your communication skills shouldn't be lacking, especially in today's world. There is no reason why you should not have things lined up for yourself in terms of knowing where you're going, what you're doing. And if you don't, that's okay, but we're going to make sure that you get there, right? Helping each child to discover their passion and discover what they want to do in life. When you work on the soft skills, that just comes naturally, because a child who has a high level of soft skills is much more in tune with themselves. They are much more confident. They're much more vocal. They are much more passionate about life in general. And so it's much easier when you say, what problems would you like to solve when you are an adult? They have an answer for you.
Because they've thought about it and they're capable of
Because
expressing themselves without bursting
exactly.
into flames, right? When you ask
Right,
them a
like,
question
what
like
do you
that.
mean? Exactly, exactly. And I find that's a very common theme with homeschooled students, with students who are homeschooled, or with students whose parents give them the gift of extracurricular academic learning or extracurricular executive functioning. Like classes, they are much better at verbalizing, and they're much better at communicating what it is that they're interested in, which then gives them a lot more opportunities in this world of ours. Because if you don't stand up and speak out for yourself, nobody else is going to.
Right. I'll add, when I founded Steeris originally, the goal and the focus was on helping youth acquire soft skills because that would help them
Mhm.
with greater success in life later. And I was on all these different homeschool chats and mom chats and all this. And I got roasted and basically booted out of several groups and all this because they said, like, how
Oh
dare
no.
you even accuse my child of, like, who's being homeschooled, that they need soft skills. It's like, well, clearly they're not getting them from you, honey, right? So
Yeah,
I mean, but yeah, they're essential. I
yeah,
get it. I get it.
yes, a hundred
So,
percent, a hundred
yeah,
percent. The value cannot be undermined, and that's something that's really really important. However, soft skills cannot be taught. Like, you can't teach yourself soft skills. I mean, okay, you can, but it's very long and very difficult, and it's pretty lonely. So that would be the sixth tip that I would say, is to make learning, in whatever sense you're doing, collaborative. If you make learning collaborative and you make it fun and you make it a team effort, rather than, oh, this is something that you have to do, this is something that you need to learn, as opposed to, hey, let's sit down and learn it together, right? Even if you as an adult might already know what you're doing, you're sitting down and you're learning it with them. It's a team effort. It's not just you versus me, it's us versus whatever problem you're looking at on the board, right? Or on the table.
And
um,
Phil, you had something to say. Maybe I think we jumped over. Did you, sorry, want to add in?
I think it's extraordinary to have the students answer that question, what problems they want to solve. And
mhm,
I'm just, when I'm working with a lot of high school students, they're not prepared to problem solve. So if the
mhm,
work that
mhm,
you're doing is critical thinking and helping with that particular skill set, and then problem solving, another very important skill set. And there is no problem solving in high school classes. It is, you're working on a problem specifically directly for math or maybe science that's already been done
mhm.
before, and now you're reviewing the material, but they're not and yet through the organizations and clubs, there can be opportunities to work on problems. But
Mhm.
there's teachers there guiding them. But more importantly, is that's a wonderful service that you're providing the students and the parents to have them thinking about solving problems and be confident in what problems
Mhm.
they want to pursue. So I congratulate you
Oh,
and,
well,
and the work that you're doing. And I'm
thank
going
you.
to even weave that into one of the questions that I'm asking the students when we're trying to determine what they want to learn, and what do they want to be a subject matter expert in.
Yeah,
And it's
happy to help.
yes, thank you.
Well,
Yeah, no
this is
problem.
what Helpopedia is all about, is helping, making an impact.
Yeah,
And every conversation, it's all about trading nuggets, right? And
yes,
you always learn something from somebody and you get it, you get a takeaway, and it makes it fun. All right.
absolutely.
Tip
100%.
7, as we bring this
Um,
home, Kimberly.
Yes, yeah, tip 7. So the last thing, that I would say, and again, like I said, this goes, I mean, some of these tips are more applicable to certain areas of education, but this one is, I think, one of the ones that you can, regardless
Mhm.
of what your child's educational journey looks like, this is the biggest one I would say that can be applied like at the highest level. It's really, really, really important to celebrate progress, not just the outcomes, right? It's really important to recognize effort and to celebrate the mini steps forward that got you there, not just, oh, I got an A. I mean, if you get an A in science, great, fantastic, good for you. That is awesome. But let's celebrate the journey that you took to get there, because look how hard you worked. If you're in public school, I would say, look how well you followed instructions to get that A, right? Look how much material you, in the case of science, it would be how much material you memorized, right? In the case of math, it would be how many formulas you know, right? If you're coming from a public school perspective, right, or a public school experience, regardless of what you did to get whatever grade you got or to get to whatever milestone you're getting to, celebrating that progress along the way is so important, because oftentimes, and I'm speaking to myself here as well, oftentimes we just look at the outcome of something rather than the journey that we took to get there, and recognizing, like, hey, I'm a whole human being and I did that and I did all those little mini steps, right? Because oftentimes the confidence does not come from the outcome itself, it comes from the experience of that journey along the way and all the things you did to get there.
This is exactly what folks are wanting to do, right? And you can maybe take us home here as the leader of STAR students and talk to us about, okay, you've shown us multiple ways that personalized learning is essential, where it's beneficial. How can parents achieve this if their child is already enrolled in a standard curriculum at a private or public school, and maybe they can't afford to send their child to an after school program? What can they do?
I would say one of the biggest things to, well, first you need to remember, you need to have the attitude of, um, you don't need to be an expert in everything, especially as a parent. I mean, as any human being, you don't need to be an expert in everything. You just need to be the guide that your child can trust. So the biggest thing I would say for parents who have their child in a private school or in a public school, who maybe can't take that step at the moment to pull them out or to get them into extracurriculars or whatever it might be, you need to be the advocate for your child, because right now your child is not particularly at the age where they can speak for themselves at this point. You have to be able to show them, and how better to show them than to exemplify that, right? And then to be an example for them. I would say that's the biggest thing that I could say, that the most useful tip that I could give, for parents, is getting yourself in that mindset and then taking that action, right? And not forgetting to celebrate yourself along the way.
Excellent. So with that, we've got Kimberly Gawne here. We're going to say thank you. We've got the link there down below, starstudents.co, and just keep on going out there, getting our students all wrapped up in soft skills and life skills and how to interact and how to learn, and remind people that learning can be fun, and it also shouldn't end when you finish high school. We should embrace lifelong learning.
Yes. Hmm. And it won't as long as you personalize that K to 12 experience, right? Because then they'll be enthusiastic about learning in the future.
Bingo, bingo. With that, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you,
Thank
Phil.
you.